Today, after 2 years of negotiations, the United States, together with our international partners, has achieved something that decades of animosity has not: a comprehensive long-term deal with Iran that will prevent it from obtaining a nuclear weapon. This deal demonstrates that American diplomacy can bring about real and meaningful change that makes our country and the world safer and more secure. This deal is also in line with a tradition of American leadership. It's now more than 50 years since President Kennedy stood before the American people and said, "Let us never negotiate out of fear, but let us never fear to negotiate."
Hello, Bobby Jones here, filling in for Ken Harbaugh on MeidasTouch and Valor Media Networks. It's been quite a busy week and a half regarding the United States, Israel, and Iran. But I think people are focusing on just part of the issue. Everybody's asking what's next and why did we do this, et cetera, et cetera. But no one's really talked about how did we get here? Well, to be completely honest with you, it's a very simple reason. The self-proclaimed world's greatest deal maker doesn't understand how to do statecraft. Iran had nuclear ambitions going back to the actual revolution in 1979. However, after the invasion of Iraq by United States forces in the early 2000s, this development became a paramount priority for the government in Iran. So there was really no communication between the Bush administration at the time and Iran on that particular subject, because they were adversaries in the region. And so there was no need to talk. Bush and the administration had an isolationist policy towards Iran, trying to isolate them economically and diplomatically. Well, when President Obama came in, he decided to take a different course. And this is where that whole phrase JCPOA comes into play. The Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action, or the JCPOA, was something that was not just negotiated with the United States, but with multiple nations. The need for this was very simple. The world had no visibility on what Iran's nuclear program was doing. They just had the word of Iran. And that, quite honestly, freaked out a lot of people. So in response to that, the United States, the European Union, and the United Nations started imposing very crippling sanctions during the 2000s that really made it very hard for Iran to make money, especially because they were isolated from the oil and banking systems that the world used. So fast forward to 2009, President Obama comes into the White House and decided to take a more diplomatic approach after years of isolation under the Bush administration. So as he started to negotiate, an important election took place in 2013. In 2013, President Hassan Rouhani became president and initiated back-channel negotiations with the United States, mainly through the country of Oman. Oman was basically the go-between between the nations as they started to negotiate a deal. By 2015, July, after 2 years of back-channel negotiations and then forward negotiations, Iran plus the P5 plus one, that'd be the United States, United Kingdom, France, Russia, China, and Germany, finalized the JCPOA. And what did that deal do? That deal had Iran commit to the following major things. Number one, reduce their enriched uranium stockpile by 98% for 15 years. Limit what enrichment they had to only 3.67%, well below weapons grade nuclear material. They also had to remove 2/3 of their centrifuges. They had to allow 24/7 random and invasive inspections, all conducted under the IAEA. And then they had to reconfigure one of their heavy water reactors so it could not produce plutonium. The United States and international community then committed to lifting nuclear-related economic sanctions. They unfroze Iranian assets all over the world that totaled almost $100 billion. And they allowed Iran back into the international oil and banking systems. President Obama at that time said, They had blocked every path Iran has to a nuclear weapon, and they could trust but verify. And in his mind, it was much better than resulting to a military-related conflict based on unchecked uranium and enrichment. Fast forward to the election of 2016 in the United States, and in comes President Donald John Trump. By 2018, May 8th to be exact, the United States formally withdrew from the JCPOA. Now, as significant as it was for the United States to leave, the other countries that signed on and Iran tried to maintain that arrangement. This is something that Trump called the JCPOA the worst deal ever negotiated. Because if you know anything about President Trump, it's all about hyperbolic terms. The worst deal ever negotiated. He said that Iran was secretly violating the agreement, even though the IAEA found no such evidence of that. And believe me, they looked. This became part of what President Trump called the maximum pressure campaign. They re-added all of the sanctions that were prior to the JCPOA from the United States perspective. They sanctioned oil exports. They sanctioned the Central Bank of Iran, and then other secondary sanctions on countries that were dealing with Iran. Iran's response was not good, to be honest, nor would you expect it. They tried to stay in the deal, but from about 2019 into 2020, into the pandemic, they began gradually violating the limits of the deal because in their minds, the United States had pulled out and effectively hollowed the deal. As President Trump continued his maximum pressure campaign, in January of 2020, he ordered the assassination of General Soleimani, a high-ranking official in the IRG forces, and basically effectively killed any type of diplomatic way to settle the nuclear issue with Iran. As a matter of fact, Iran's proxies, such as the Houthis and forces in Syria, began targeting Americans all over the region. And it culminated with an attack of Iranian missiles on an Iraqi American base that led to over 100 injuries after the attack. Trump had done such a terrible job in positioning the United States to further negotiate that even after he left office and President Joe Biden came in, the bridge was pretty much still burned. Partly because Iran had elected a new president, President Raisi, and he demanded that there would be guarantees that if the United States and Iran re-entered that deal, that no president after Biden would pull out of the deal. Well, the United States Constitution does not allow for such an arrangement to be had. So that was a non-starter. Because of that, Iran continued to expand their enrichment beyond the previously agreed to JCPOA levels. And there was absolutely really no invasive oversight by the IAEA or any other international organization due to the fact that Iran no longer felt they were held to the agreement. Because of the lack of transparency, once the United States and then basically Iran withdrew from this deal, the fog of war now becomes a thing. Prime Minister Netanyahu was able to convince Donald Trump, who was in a diminished state. He publicly over the last few weeks has been taking loss after loss. His parade, terrible. His fallout with Elon Musk, terrible. The Epstein files, which is a big deal here in the United States, terrible. And then being basically laughed at the G7 summit, terrible. He looked weak for a period of weeks, and he believed that this military involvement with the airstrikes could help, restore his prestige or reattach his manhood diplomatically and domestically, whatever you want to call it. However, we are here because of what he did before he came back into office. And most importantly, we still don't know what the heck we're doing in the region because there is no diplomatic solution that has been presented. As a matter of fact, now we're hearing that the United States is trying to offer $30 billion in an economic package just to get Iran back to the table to negotiate something, because it's very apparent now that they've tried it with the maximum pressure way that the only way we're going to come to a long-term solution is diplomatically. And this is where the self-proclaimed ultimate deal maker has failed.
New Meidas merch drop. Check out the latest pro-democracy sticker packs, t-shirts, hats, sweatshirts, and more. All at store.meidastouch.com.